Do you want to be known as a man or a woman of great faith? Do you want to be remembered as someone whose faith in God is greater than any fear? If so, you've found the right podcast. This is called Finish Strong by Fearless Faith. That's the name of our ministry. And you know, it's more than just a name of our ministry. It's the way we want to live our lives. I'm Dan Wheeler, and I'm joined with Terry Steen and Brian Rowland, and we're the three principals of Fearless Faith. Guys, you are men of great faith, and it's the name of our ministry, but I don't think we've been talking about it enough.
It's probably true. And, you know, to just hear someone say you have great faith, the first thing that comes into your mind is, no, I don't. You know?
When did that happen?
It's hard to grab a hold of and really get a sense of it, isn't it? Yeah.
It was interesting because my pastor, Steve, who we've had on last Sunday, was talking about everything that's going on in the world and how a lot of people have just give up. And he goes, but God says, I'll never leave you or forsake you. And if you got that, he goes, what else do you need? And I went, you know, he's absolutely right. That's where your faith really comes in. Just depend on that word.
That's so true, Brian. But in today's world and with the headlines, it's hard sometimes, isn't it? You have to say, Lord, help my faith.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen. You know, we have to get close to God. We have to hear his voice. We have to be filled with his spirit. You know, the faith is a fruit of the Spirit. So if we don't have the Spirit in our life, we can't have strong faith. So faith doesn't just happen. There's a process and an effort to get there.
Yeah. And Brian, it's like, you know, when we work out, we work our muscles and build strong faith. We have to work our faith and exercise it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I did a morning cup years ago on the treadmill and talking about that. And it's true. If you don't exercise your muscles, they're going to go away. They're atrophy. They're just going to go away. And it's happened to me.
You couldn't do that now, could you? You couldn't be on the treadmill long enough to do a morning cup.
I can get one sentence out maybe.
Well, we're going to get into all the aspects of faith, but you mentioned our morning cup of inspiration. Guys, cause for celebration.
Yes.
We now have over 40,000 followers on our Fearless Faith Facebook page. So if you haven't joined us on Facebook, it's Fearless Faith, or at FFM 60, and our logo is 3 flames.
It's exciting. That's been a long time coming, but over the last few months, it's really accelerated, hasn't it? It's so exciting to see the international audience take an interest in our message.
It really is. And we've got people that listen to this podcast from all over the world as well. So, Terry, let's get going with the first section. We wanted to talk about faith and trust and what's the difference, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because they kind of go together, but they're distinctly separate. That faith is the belief system. Faith is a noun. Yeah. And so it describes an attribute. And one of my favorite verses is Hebrews 11:6. And listen to what it says. It says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So that's the noun. Obviously, we all want to please God, but we cannot do it without faith. And then you compare that to trust. Trust is a verb. Trust is an action. It's putting your faith in action. And anytime you think about trust, you come back to Proverbs 3, the 5th verse, where it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not unto your own understanding. So it's so important that we put trust in him, but we can't have that trust if we don't have the faith to back it up, right?
Right. And, you know, just the opposite of that, what's going to try to destroy your faith is going to be worry and doubt. And this are 2 things that come against faith. And they're just the opposite of faith because it causes fear. Over in Philippians 4:6, the Bible tells us, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. He wants us to come to him and just present to him what's going on. What are we worried about? What is on our hearts that is keeping us, keeping our faith from kicking into action? And he wants us to lay it down and give it to him because it tells us over in James 1:6 then, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. See, that's where your faith is. You got to ask and believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of steam blown and tossed by the wind. And that's all it is. If it's just words, it's just empty words if you don't believe what you're praying for. So why are you even praying if you're not believing? I mean, because he's telling you to come to me, and I'll give you rest. Come to me. Put it all on my shoulders. Let me do the heavy lifting. And that's where faith comes in.
Yeah. I've got to ask you guys, and I'm going off script here, but I've had people ask me, is worry and anxiety and a lack of trust, is it sin? And see, I don't think it is, because God knows how human we are. And you see a lot of examples of great men in faith who weren't so great at the time. I mean, you look at Peter, he denied the Lord twice or thrice. And they were cowardly. And so many of them couldn't do the things that Jesus did. And he said it was your lack of faith. Do you think it's a sin, or just something we got to work on?
I think it's a chink in the armor. I don't think it's sin. It's just that people haven't grown to that place yet. And the reason they haven't is because they're not in the Word and they're not in prayer. Because like Terry said before, you got to get when you get closer to God, He reveals Himself to you, and it's one of the one of the fruits of faith. Yeah, and it's something that you get by being closer, by having the Holy Spirit working in your body and in your system, because you are leaning on God. And you learn to do that more and more. How many times have we, as kids, especially we all grew up in Christian homes, but that we see our parents just lean on the Lord, and they had no idea where the answer was coming from. And I know it's happened in Deb's and my life already too, where we just had to lean on Him and say, "You got it," and let go of the reins, man. It's like Jesus take the wheel, and He's done it, and it's built our faith. And some people haven't done that yet, but when they do, it'll build their faith. I don't think it's a sin. I think it's just that it's a trust issue, and they just need to do it.
I will say that the Bible tells us not to do it. So whether it's a sin or not a sin, it's not something that we can not worry about.
Right.
Yeah.
Not worry about worrying. You know?
Right. Well, can you guys pray for me? I seem to have misplaced $8,000 cash somewhere in my house. Seriously.
Well, I found it. I forgot to tell you. I found it. And, it's gone.
Well, Terry, you gave good advice. You said, pray about it and then go to bed. And I know it'll pop up. But, God has put great faith stories in the Bible, true stories, to build our faith. And I'm going to start out with one of my favorites, David and Goliath. And I know Terry's going to talk about my height.
What? Yeah. I don't get on you about that often, do I?
Well, only every day. So Goliath was like this 9-10 foot giant, and he's just, defying the armies of God. And the greatest warriors in the Israelite army are cowering by this guy.
Yeah.
And along comes a teenager, David, to bring food to his older brothers. And David's like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? You look at in 1 Samuel 17:26, and I love it because David calls him out. He says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? He's kind of saying, how dare he defy the armies of the living God? And all the soldiers are looking at him like, who's this kid? Yeah. And then, Goliath is taunting him. But David's faith was way bigger than his fears. In fact, I think in that moment, he didn't have fear. He overcame it with tremendous faith. And then he acted on it. And he a lot of people say that you cannot overcome fear, but action will overcome fear. That was W. Clement Stone. And then it says, speaking of stones, David gathered 5 of them, and he had a little sling, and he said, I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me. I will strike you down, cut off your head. I mean, you talk about bold.
Exactly.
He wasn't taking any guff. And then this is my favorite, any guff, I should say. Verse 48, as the Philistine, because he was ticked then, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna take care of you. And as he moved to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him, reaching into his bag, taking out a stone. He slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, fell face down to the ground. Triumph, victory But don't you love it? He ran toward the enemy.
He got the momentum going. That's probably part of what made the stone go as fast as it did.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
But one thing I think about was as he was going is that he did not listen to his brothers or the soldiers.
Yeah, the critics.
They were so afraid. They wanted to feed all that into his head. He didn't listen. His only thought was what he remembered, how God had never failed him.
Right.
I killed the lion. I killed the bear. And he was looking back to what God's done in the past and not listening to the naysayers. And it positioned him to head straight toward the giant.
That's good.
That is real good. And you got to think, he ran towards the, Goliath, whereas he still was quite a distance compared to where he probably was at when he killed the lion and the bear. And they had more weapons than just a sword. When you got their teeth, they got their claws, and they got their speed. I'm sure Goliath wasn't a fast runner, but you see that, and so he had no fear.
Yeah, and he made use of what he had. He had those stones, the slingshot. He turned down the suit of armor, the sword. He's like, I can't use these. Here's what I know. And I like what you said, Terry. When we go through hard times, when we're facing a challenge, think back about how God has been faithful. Remember those times when he was there. What's one of your favorite stories, Terry, in the Bible?
Another one, great one, 3 Hebrew kids, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And this story is found in Daniel, the 3rd chapter. And most people who have read the Bible or been to Sunday school know this story. So I don't think we need to hit everything on it, but I did want to mention a couple things, because if you'll remember, King Nebuchadnezzar had built a huge, what do you call those?
Idol, statue.
Yeah, statue or an idol that he wanted everyone to bow down and worship, and they weren't going to do it. And so these guys just kind of ratted him out. The king came to him, said, hey, if you don't bow down, I'm going to throw you into this blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand. And the neat thing is that these guys had all this pressure, all this culture coming against them, and they did not bow to the culture. Is that not so relevant to us today? The culture that's hitting us in the face every day, it would be so easy to take the easy road and not make a deal about it, but we have to come against the culture and know to do what's right. So it's interesting that they said to the king, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If you throw us into the burning furnace, the God we serve is able to save us. They didn't even say God will save us.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
They said he's able to save us. And that's the kind of faith we need to have, because we don't know how he's going to do things in our life.
Right.
We just need to know he is able.
Right.
Yeah. And they followed up and said, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to serve your God. We serve the Lord.
Exactly. And that is so key to this whole story to me, that whether he does or doesn't, we're going to do the right thing and do what God tells us to do. And we will not serve your gods. So it goes on. They get thrown into the fire. And of course, the king looks in. They're not burned at all. And there's a 4th person in there, which we know is God.
Yeah.
And God was with them through the fire. And how incredible if we can just build our faith enough to know any fire, any trial, any furnace that we're going through, he's going to be there with us.
It's amazing. It's an amazing story.
And the beautiful end of the story is that God proved himself, and the king basically got saved.
He did.
The king believed in these 3 Hebrew children's God and said that anyone else who didn't would be punished. So it just reversed the whole story through God's might and his power. It's a great story, isn't it?
They were promoted in the fire, and even they turned it up 7 times hotter. The guys that threw them in were killed.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet, don't you love that, Brian? We see 4 people in there. Didn't we throw in 3? And one looks like the Son of God. Boy, did the Lord get a hold of that king that day.
Yeah.
Got his attention, didn't he? Yeah. Got his attention.
Yeah.
And the same thing for the story I want to talk about is Gideon. And how the Lord got his attention too, because we know what happens was with the Israelites, they were sinning against God. He gave them their land, and he says, but do not worship any other gods. And of course, they fall into worshiping Baal. And when they did that, the Lord over in Judges 6:1, actually the whole story is in Judges 6 and 7, but in 6:1 it says the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. And so here they are. They're basically slaves again. I mean, every time they were growing crop and they were putting stuff together, they would be raided by these different armies, and they would just lay them flat every year. Just lay it flat, take all their fruits, vegetables, grains, you name it. They were taking it. And Gideon was down actually grinding grain at a wine press to keep it, trying to hide it from these other guys that we knew they were going to be coming in to take it again. And as all these armies are gathering, they're down in this valley and they're gathering, and God comes to Gideon. And it says over in Judges 6:12, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Well, Gideon kind of laughed at that mighty warrior. He was the run of the litter of his family. And he said, he's going to be the mighty warrior. And so he's going, okay, this is great. And how do you expect me to do this? And so, but he was telling him how he was going to defeat them. And it's going to leave it in the Lord's hands. But he asked, he said, I need you to go. And he said, I want you to tear down Baal's, his altar to Baal. And I forget what the pole was called, some kind of pole, Asher pole. And so he didn't want to go in the daytime because he said they'll kill him for sure. So he waited till nighttime, and they got down there with some guys, and they tore down all of Baal's altars and that, and took the Asher pole out, and he built an altar for the Lord, and he created a sacrifice. And I'm getting a little ahead because this happened before with another sacrifice, but you have to read the story because I want to take up too much time. But he gave the sacrifice. Well, all the people in town came for him because what did he do? And his father said, he goes, what, you're going to have Baal kill him? Why are you guys coming to kill him for? Let your God, if he's so powerful, let him do it. So they decided to do that. Okay, well, let Baal do it. Well, God had told Gideon to get his army together. So Gideon said, I'm going to go. I will do this, but I got to put out a fleece. I want to put out a fleece. You see, he took what it was a fleece of wool. I think that's why it's called the fleece now, right? It was a wool fleece, and he put it out, and he asked the Lord to have dew just on that fleece and everything else dry the next morning. And it happened. So he just said, can I do it one more time, God? Just reverse it. The next night, I said, just reverse it. So the next morning, the fleece was dry and everything else was wet all around it. So he was ready to go. And so he gathered thousands of men to go down there to take these guys. And what happens is God says, that's too many. You got too many guys. He starts weeding them out. Finally, he told him, he says, take the rest of your men down to the river there and see, I will separate them. He says, see which ones just put their head in the water and which ones kneel down and pick it up and lap it out of their hand. And those are your men. And it ended up being only 300. And he was going to go against 135,000. So
not great odds.
Not great odds. But what did God do? He took Gideon and his men out of the equation completely. You can't say, well, look what we did. This is look what God did. Yeah. And so he told them, he says he had everybody else go home, but he gave them their trumpets. He gave them a jug and a candle, basically, or a torch. And he told them, he says, put your men around the camp here, and 100 here, 100 here, 100 here. And Gideon said, follow me when I do this. When I blow the horn, blow your horns. When I crash the vase, you crash it, and then hold your torches up. And they did that, exactly what he said to do at the time. So what happened is that everybody in those armies started killing each other. They started fighting each other. And Gideon didn't have to raise a sword. But this is what God did. He goes, I will take care of this if you let me take care of you and you trust in me and do as I tell you. Honor me. And this is what I'm going to do for you. He took care of them completely. And I don't think they went back to worshiping Baal right
No,
now.
no. A lot of stories though, because Gideon was questioning, he was doubting. Yep. God kept proving himself, and he still called him a mighty warrior.
And God chose him, even though he was he was a nobody, but he was part of the smallest tribe too. Yeah. So it's like God uses that humility, doesn't he? And then he just wants total obedience and to know that it's totally out of our hands,
right,
and totally into his. I know we don't have a lot of time, but when you talk about the fleece, it reminds me of when Karen and I were engaged. And for some reason, Karen was questioning whether we should get married. She was thinking
Brian, do you blame her?
Hey, come on.
What made her change her mind?
For some reason, how about
you realize how sharp this girl is. So she put out a fleece, and she said, if our wedding announcements come back incorrect, then I may want to hold off on this. The announcements came back incorrect.
Oh my God.
They were wrong.
They did.
So she goes to her mom and she goes, what do I do? And not a lot of people may like their mother-in-law. Mine said, Gideon put out a second fleece. And so she resent them. They came back okay the second time, and the rest is history. I don't think she ever regretted that decision more than once a day.
Wow, I never knew she did that, but smart girl.
Wow.
Yeah, well, she's pulled you through a lot, Terry.
Yeah, she has.
But yeah, great stories. We all need to grow. We need to encourage our faith. And it doesn't take a lot of faith, just the small faith. I mean, Jesus said, if you have the faith of a grain of mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. That's in Matthew 17:20. And, but sometimes it's not easy to have that faith. Yeah. And there's a story in Mark that is interesting because a man actually said, I believe. It's in Mark chapter 9. Let's see, Mark chapter 9. Here we go, 23 to 25. And so from childhood, this guy's son was thrown to the fire and he had convulsions and he wanted Jesus to heal him. And he said, but if you can do anything, Lord, have pity on us and heal us. And Jesus said, if you can? You're asking me if you can? He said, everything is possible for him who believes. And when Jesus saw that the crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the evil spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter into him again. But there's a situation where Jesus understood that the man, had low faith. And he actually appreciated that. He said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Yeah. And that's very important because, Brian, in our next section, we're going to talk about unbelief. It can actually stop great things.
We all fight it. Yeah.
Yep, it's true. And that happened and tells it's funny because you think, well, how do we tie God's hands? And that's it right there. I mean, nobody can tie his hands, but it's like over in Mark, chapter 6, it talks about when Jesus went back to his hometown and he went back there and he was speaking in the temple or in the synagogue, and people were going, "How did this guy? Where does he get all this knowledge? Because he's from here, isn't that the carpenter's son?" And he was saying that he was teaching and preaching to him, and they didn't want to believe what they were hearing, though. So it's like, show me and then I'll believe. Well, he did so. He healed some people. And some looked at that and said, okay, this is great, but he didn't do big miracles. And it's like, no, I'm not the wizard here. I'm going to do stuff and you're going to go, ooh, I believe in you now. It's got to be the other way around. You got to believe first.
Yeah, he wanted to work with their faith.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so by them not believing, he was not performing miracles in there. And some people were healed, but not as many as could have been. Not what could have really happened in there if they would have just believed in him and not just thought, well, who's this guy? We remember him when he grew up here. Oh, they don't know about the anointing. They don't know that really where he came from. Mary knew, Joseph knew, and they could tell him all they want, but the people have to believe that.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left, guys.
Yeah. I think the last thought I would have is the importance of encouraging and believing with others and for others. Sometimes people need part of our faith to feel strong enough, and vice versa. I'm thinking of the story in Acts, the 14th chapter, where Paul's preaching, and basically at his feet is a crippled man from birth. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to be healed. And Paul, it says in the 9th verse of that chapter, it says, Paul discerned that the man had faith in his heart to be healed, but he wasn't healed. He had the faith. And so in the next verse, Paul said, he told him to stand. And then when he told him to stand, the man stood up and was healed. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if he had the faith, why couldn't he have been healed so much sooner? And sometimes we just need that help. We need that encouragement from others to come along beside us and help build our faith. And that's what the three of us are doing with Fearless Faith. We're trying to come along beside others and help strengthen and build their faith, just like we're trying to build our own.
Right.
Yeah, it says, if 2 or 3 of you agree on anything on earth you ask, my Father in heaven will do it. That's in Matthew 18:19. There's 3 of us here, and we got a lot of other people agreeing with us. So let's pray real quick. Lord, I pray for everyone listening and for all of us who need help with faith. Sometimes we're weak, our faith is small, and we ask you to help us. And we want to be mighty warriors like Gideon was called. And we want to see people healed, and we want to see people saved, especially in the times we live in, is more important than ever. Help us to stand in our faith in you fearlessly. And I pray for every person listening, help them to have the faith they need in you, to trust in you as their Savior. In thy name, amen. Well, guys, we learned a lot of things here. What did you learn, Brian?
Well, I learned that we don't have to see something to believe it. We got to believe first. When we believe it, we're going to see God take action.
Yeah. Terry?
How important is faith in our life? It's impossible to please God if we don't have it. Right. So it's something that we need to work hard at seeking God, reading his word, being filled with the Spirit, and then allow that fruit of faith to grow within us.
And we need to grow our faith by exercising it, just like we build up our muscles. And I'm encouraged by these stories, because sometimes the greatest men of the Bible, the greatest men of faith, they faltered, they questioned, they needed fleeces. They're like, do you know what you're doing, Lord? But when God works with us in our faith, all things are possible.
Amen.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, we thank you for joining us for this edition of Finish Strong. Encourage others to tune into this podcast. And don't forget about our Facebook page called Fearless Faith. Our logo is a flame, 3 flames, and you can find us at FFM60 and YouTube. We have lots of videos on YouTube. Go there. We have a YouTube channel by the same name, Fearless Faith. It's been a blast, guys. I love working with you. So much fun.
Enjoyed it.
Okay, we like you too.
Gosh, it's about time. I was really, kind of searching for a compliment. All right. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again for Finish Strong.
Thank you for listening to Finish Strong. For more information about Finish Strong and Fearless Faith, check out their website, ffaith.org. Make sure that you rate and review this podcast to help more people accomplish their God-given purpose, so that together we can finish strong.